Sometimes the actual work of piecing together a hot rod isn't the best part of the process.
It's not just a car, it's time spent with my dad in the garage, and that's just so valuable, and I was so lucky to have that. So lucky to be able to make time for that.
Welcome to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast telling the stories behind the cars and the people who build and drive them. I'm Joe McCullough, and in this special Father's Day episode, Jess Gasper joins us to talk about growing up in the garage and on the Bonneville Salt Flats with her father, John MacKichan, and how important it's been for her to maintain that relationship through all of life's twists and turns. A lot of us have stories about how we got involved in cars, and a lot of times that story starts with our dads. You know, mine, working with my dad in the garage, but you had like the ultimate version of that. What was the first memory that you have, or the first time that you realized that maybe this is not normal and not everybody's dad is doing what my dad is doing?
Oh yeah, and I don't think I understood how good we had it until much later. Like, my childhood is something that I took for granted a lot as a kid, and it wasn't until much later I realized how important it was, and how strange it was. We were always around cars, always around hot rods. In 1988, my dad and his partner Tim Schulz built a Streamliner to go to the Bonneville Salt Flats, and I was 6, and it kind of like took over our lives the way a Bonneville car does, and it was just part of our life. And we, celebrated birthdays with the crew down at the shop every August. We would go to the Salt Flats every summer to help race the car, and we kind of grew up with the car. And I don't think until I met you, who was like a fan of the Salt Flats, where I was like, oh yeah, we had it pretty good. we had a special childhood, because it was just part of our lives, and we didn't know any different. It was just ingrained that, this year we're going to work really hard, and then we're going to go to the Salt Flats, and then we're going to work our tails off at the Salt Flats and maybe make a record and come home and clean the car and do it again the next year. So that was just part of our MacKichan family life was Bonneville. I remember when I was real little, I remember when they, were trying to plan out the body shape. So they had these plywood templates to help plan out the shape of the body and to get it aerodynamic. And when they were welding up the chassis for the first time, and when they painted it yellow the first time. And we helped pull the fiberglass tape off the first bodies. We helped Tim do that, because we could sit there for hours and do that. And
right.
The car evolved, and then we grew up with it, and it was just what we did. They were always working on the car, and it's funny how it's funny to think that there's so much time between trips to the Salt Flats, but by the time you get home from the Salt and then you're working on the car and getting it cleaned up, the time between the next trip to the Salt is actually very, very short. And so it took all of their time. They worked on it every day. It was a family affair for all
right.
of us, all of us kids, our mom, our uncles, our cousins, kids from the university. Everybody pitched in.
Yeah, and so your dad and Tim were on the podcast last season sort of talking about that, and they were both super adamant, like, we want to make sure that we thank the kids, because they were there for every bit of it, and they were working just as hard as we were,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that's something, Bonneville is something that's kind of a bucket list thing for lots of car people, and it was for me, until I finally went. I couldn't afford to go. I had no business of going, but I went anyway because I really wanted to. And it's still a bucket list thing for me to go and actually crew on a car.
Oh,
and
sure.
You were just doing that. Like, that was just part of your life.
That was part of it, yeah. And then after we retired the Streamliner, I helped my friend Scotty crew on his car. And there was one year where we weren't exactly crew. My dad and I went out, and we felt lost without being part of a crew. Like, there wasn't as much to do. You just kind of sat and watched the cars, and he got bored of it really quickly. And then after that, he stopped going really after that. And then I kept going out with Scotty to help him. And then the Salt kind of fell apart. In like 2014, it got called off here and there. So,
yeah.
But that was just part of our life. And he would bring the Streamliner to our school and show it to the school as like a come out to the parking lot and see this cool thing they're doing. And
oh, that's
he was
cool.
in the paper. Yeah. And it kind of ruined my sense of what fast is.
Yeah.
I just remember these boys that, driving age back out in the country, we could drive at 14 to get to school, and all the farm boys were talking about how fast they could drive to school, and it ruined my sense of fast, because we had seen the Terminator go like 477 miles an hour, and it like skipped across the salt, because your brain can't think about how fast it is. And so I was like, that's not fast. Like, I know what fast is. So it just kind of, it bumped up my perception of racing. And, but I don't think it was until much later I was more of an adult when I was like, oh yeah, this is really special, especially around the time we retired the car in 2010. That's when it was like, this is the end of an era. And those last 2 trips to the Bonneville Salt Flats in 2010, where we made a final record on our final run, and it was the retirement of the car, and then we cleaned up the car and we put it in the museum. That's when I kind of realized that how like very, very important that time was.
And lots of kids don't necessarily want to be a part of what's important to their parents. There are lots of parents who do a thing and then the kids do their other thing, and that's just sort of the way that it is. And it's not been my experience, because my daughters love hanging out in the shop with me, but some girls aren't, if their dad's out grinding and welding and making a big mess, aren't necessarily going to want to be around for that. What drew you to the shop and made you want to be a part of all of this?
Oh, sure. I was always a helper. If of us 4 kids, I was probably the one down in the shop helping my dad. And he really wanted to include me, and he wanted to include the other siblings as well. But it was important to him to include me. And then it became important to me to be included and include myself, and then also be with him. So that just kind of developed over time. And we really had to decide that was a priority, especially as life gets busier and we start to grow up and things pull us away, like school or full-time jobs or the race car. You just had to come back and say, this is what's important to be together. And I really don't think either of us understood what that was going to mean to us now that it did, 10 years ago, 11, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, really. Mm-hmm. So that just, I think you start to experience life and loss and grief, and you get hurt, and life's expensive, life is hard, and gosh, my parents really knew what they were talking about. They were really trying to push me down the right path. And so I think you start to understand that, and really look back and appreciate what we had and what we still have, and what we're so lucky to still have.
When I met you, it was now a long, long time ago. It doesn't seem like it was that long, but it was in fact a long time ago. We were juniors in college. I was just thinking about that earlier. Yeah. And we were both graphic design students, and we happened to be in the same printmaking class. And I was just ate up with cars. It was, I should have been focusing on school, but instead I was focusing on cars. And I made a print of a 32 Ford 3-window coupe. And you saw it and were like, hi, I'm Jess. My dad runs a Bonneville Streamliner, and I'm building a 33 Ford coupe. And I mean, you could have told me that you guys were building a rocket to the moon in your backyard, and I wouldn't have been more impressed. How did the Coupe Project come about?
Oh, sure. I remember that print. You always made me so jealous because you could just bang out a picture of a car. I thought that was so cool. I would try work really hard, and I could never draw cars that way. The coupe was he bought a 33 body and a 34 sedan from a man in Hebron, Nebraska in 1982, the year I was born. And he squirreled the coupe away in the attic of the shop, and the 34 went down to the barn. And then he went on with life and then had kids, and us twins, I have a twin, so I say we a lot. So that's just a side effect of being a twin. Mm-hmm. But we were surprise babies. And so life took over for him as well, back in the 80s. He had 4 small kids at that point. And so the coupe just went up in the attic as a future project. And I knew it was a future project looking back at it now, because he had a plan for it. He had a vision for what it was going to be, and he had been squirreling parts away for it since he bought it. So when you opened up the coupe doors, there was the window garnishings and rear end parts and backing plates and the spline brake drums. He was sort of just finding parts and then putting them in there, and that was going to be a project one day. And I was, like we said earlier, I was always kind of a helper, and so I was with him a lot down at the shop, working on projects or anything he was really working on. And I might have been 10, 11, around that age, and we went up to the attic to find some wood or something for a project, and he pointed at that and said, "We're going to build that someday." And it concreted in my brain, like a 10-year-old brain, of like, yeah, that's going to be our car. We're going to build it together. I had no idea what that meant. I had zero idea what it meant to put a car together, like how much work that was going to be and how much time it was going to take. But I was excited by the prospect of being with my dad and working on this really cool thing. And also, like, at that point, didn't really have a sense of what cars I was into. And so I saw that 33 5-window coupe body. It was red primer and black, and it had blue graffiti inside of it. And that just, in my brain, it was like, this is the car that I'm going to love. And so I became really good at picking out 33 and 34 bodies, just at car shows or whatever. But I started to pay attention then, I think, at that point. And then a couple years later, I was still like a preteen. My dad's best friend, Tim, it was Max Brogdon, drove his 32 coupe up from Ocala, Florida. And he was going on some sort of hot rod tour, and he parked it at the farm, and I was like, you can drive these like across states? We weren't around working hot rods. The Streamliner took over our lives, and so the 34 sedan that we were brought home in the hospital, and that went to the barn, and all these other hot rods, they went on the back burner because the Streamliner took all of our time. And so we saw a real working live hot rod that a friend of ours owned, and it was loud, and it was awful, and it was awesome. It was loud, and it smelled, and it was super cool. And that sort of like sparked up again what we could make, what we could become. And I could look at the future and say, okay, it's this. It's not that big. It's big, but it's not like impossible. Someone else did it. And so then I really started to pay attention at car shows and start to figure out the differences between a 55 and a 57, a 33 and a 34, and the Model A's and all of that. And so I just really started to pay attention. And this whole time I was working for Speedway in some aspects, so working for Bill and Joyce and being around cars and being around car shows. And it all just kind of like came together in this serendipitous way that this became, my adult life, working around cars and around car people.
And so you were building the coupe in college.
Mm-hmm.
And when did you finish it? Like how well, I guess before we get to the finished part, talk about the experience of building that car with your dad.
So we, so it was like 2001, 2002 was the winter, was break. I must have been home from the university, and so I was a freshman, and something just clicked in that we were going to start working on it. And we swung the body down from the attic and started to pile parts against it. And it's not nothing to give up like 15 feet of space in his shop, like for a project that was going to crawl to, like this project was going to take years, but he got it down and he got it in front of us, and we started to go to swap meets and collect parts, and we started to clean up the body and to see what was there and make a plan. And that was really important. I look back at now and I understand how important that was. And we just made a plan, and progress was slow but steady enough that we got a chassis under it, made it rolling. I sandblasted until my fingers bled. Just sandblasted everything, and we had the front axle that he set up on his machine, and I sat there and drilled it all day to drill the front axle. And we just spent time together, and we weren't always working in the same space or in the same project, but we were together. And I would hear stories, and his friends would drop by, and the things that I didn't know about him kind of came to the surface more, So he was working at Squirty full-time, and I was a full-time student, and he had the Streamliner. So like, he wasn't bored. He didn't have to do this. This just started to happen. And I feel like there had probably been a plan put together by him and my mom of like, you're going to retire in a couple years. What are you going to do? Should we save money for this project? Should we start this project? That kind of thing. And I think the Coupe might have been part of that. But also, like, I was growing up, my sister was growing up, my two brothers had already grown up and moved out of the house. So there might have been something of like, how do I keep involved in their lives? And maybe hot rods is that way. And so I was kind of the first one to spend a lot of time with him to get it fixed. So school and Square D and all of that kept going. And by 2007, I had graduated. I bought a house. I was working for Speedway like more than full time. I was working a lot of hours, and he had retired from Square D and was working for the museum full time. And so we were together a lot at work. And like on the perfect day, I would get to work at 7 a.m. and I would come from the east, and I would meet him on Westo from the west, and we'd follow each other into the parking lot. He would go to the museum. I would go to the main building. We'd work for like 8-9 hours. We'd go to the farm at 5 or 5:30 and eat dinner with my mom, and then go to the shop. And we'd work until 10 at night. Sometimes not as that late if things weren't going well, but we worked on it like every day. That was our goal, and we worked on it, all throughout the week and on Saturdays and Sundays, depending on how progress was going. And 2007 was a strange year because my twin sister got married in April, and the week after that, my dad had prostate cancer surgery. And so those two events kind of jolted the family, where it was my sister was just my twin. She was connected to me, and now she had bought a house. She had moved to Omaha. She had this great big new job, and she was no longer right next to me. And I feel like I couldn't have named these feelings back then, but I was working through this kind of like quote loss around my twin sister. And I think he was doing the same thing. Like his daughter had grown up and moved away, and he had those same feelings, and we never talked about it. We didn't know. I just knew that was a hard year for me that year. And so we kind of got each other through this transition. And then also, if you add on to that, the realization that he's mortal, like he's a mortal human, and the cancer kind of made us all pop into shape of like, they're not going to be here one day. And that's like a switch that gets flipped in your brain and that never gets unflipped. You always look at them a different way of like, I'm not going to have you forever. And we don't know what life is going to bring. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So the priorities got fixed. Like it was like, we should work on this now, and we should do the things we're talking about and get them done and enjoy them, and we'll get to spend time together. And so the progress in the Coupe just skyrocketed in 2007, and by the spring of 2008 we were driving it to our first show.
I mean, that's impressive. As someone who spent 15 years trying to build a hot rod, to make that kind of progress is impressive.
Oh yeah, and it's progress like brings on more progress. And so the little thing you can do today helps the little thing you can do tomorrow. And then, all of a sudden it has glass, all of a sudden it's riding height, and all of a sudden you're starting the engine for the first time, and then you're battling the wiring issue and trying to fix the brake lights. And, our hot rods are really never done, but all the little things you get to move forward. And eventually, like we worked on that Coupe from 2001 to 2018. And I would argue that we still work on it all the time. Mm-hmm. We like reprimered the body in 2009, and I put a new engine in it that same year. And then, I'm kind of constantly working on the clutch or the brakes. And then, one day we'll do the body work and do the paint work. So it's just a progression of time and resources and what you make a priority.
What does that car, when you walk out into the garage now and look at it, what does that car mean to you now?
I have a hard time putting into words, but it's just so valuable to me. It's something I'm going to carry with me the rest of my life. And it's not just a car, it's time spent with my dad in the garage. And that's just so valuable. And I was so lucky to have that. So lucky to be able to make time for that. I didn't grow up fast enough to like all of a sudden not be able to spend that time with him. And my sister, on the other hand, did. So she, got married and had a job and was away from us, and then had Charlie and had kids and then couldn't make that time anymore. And they really had to focus and make time to build the 48 and to finish the 34. I was just lucky that I had that slot of time. And then it was I kind of made it my job to pressure the rest of my siblings, like, you really, really should make time to build your car with Dad, this year, next year. And so my brother Jason built his 28 sedan Model A a couple years ago. I forget, the 2017 maybe, 17, 18. And he spent a lot of time at the farm just like I had. And he had to sacrifice, time away from his, life to come and do that. But I think he would tell you the same thing. That was really, really important to do that.
I have a feeling that this is going to be a little bit off topic, but you mentioned putting a new engine in your coupe, and it reminded me of the time that I abandoned you in Iowa with a blown engine and didn't realize it. You better tell that story, because if I tell the story, it's not going to be as good.
It was one of those things that was like not funny then, but it's funny now. And it wasn't your fault. So we had thrashed to get some stuff finished in the spring of 2008 because the power tour was stopping in Lincoln. And then we were going to take the next leg to Iowa. And I forget the town in Iowa. It was past Des Moines. I know that. Ames, Iowa. And so we decided that my dad and I were going to drive the coupe, and my mom was going to drive her 2004 T-Bird. It's a Thunderbird blue T-Bird she absolutely loves. And so she was going to follow us. And then we filled the coupe with tools and, a day's worth of clothes. And we left Lincoln, and there was that 100-year flood kind of around Iowa that year. And so we were on Highway 6 with all of these Corvettes and sports cars and hot rods, and kind of stopped in traffic for like an hour, 2 hours maybe. We were there for a long time. Oh yeah. And after like 10 minutes, all these car guys just got out of the cars and started walking around talking to each other. That was really cool. And so eventually we got to the next fairgrounds for the stop of the power tour, and I didn't have any idea of what that power tour was or how it worked and all that, but I just know that by the time we got to the event, it was pretty much closing down for the day. Yeah. And so then we went to the hotel and just checked out cars. And that night, you guys stayed in our hotel room. You slept on the floor of the hotel room. And so that night, I remember getting up at like 3 a.m. because it was raining so hard. It was raining so hard. I thought the hotel was going to blow over. And the next morning, when we were getting ready to go, my dad had gone out earlier to inspect the coupe and make sure everything was okay, and it was like full of water. Water had come in every part of the coupe, right, and through all the windows, and so he went to start it, and he turned it over, and he could tell right away that water had gotten into the engine. Yeah. And so we knew that the engine was I'd come out, and he started it for me so that I could hear what was wrong, but he shut it off real quick. He didn't want to ruin it anymore. And so we left my mom at the hotel with a book, which she was happy with, and we took her T-Bird and we just flew back to Lincoln. And Kevin Helm was head of maintenance then, and he hooked the trailer up for us, and when we took a truck and trailer back to Ames, loaded up the coupe, grabbed my mom, and then drove back to Lincoln. We went like back and forth. It was the longest day, but we had a lot of time in the car to talk about what had happened. And what we think happened is that the coupe was sitting just in the right way under a gutter that was failing on this hotel, and water just poured into over top of the air cleaner in the engine. And now if you look at the coupe, you'll see this little round gasket that we made ourselves that goes under the little wing nut on the air cleaner, because without that it just siphons right into the carburetor. And so I was scared of water for a long time with the coupe, because we basically hydrolocked it, and then when we got home within the week we had a new piston, but we had eggshelled a piston, and we didn't really hurt the block, but it could have hurt us really bad. So the very first trip with the coupe, we trailered it home.
To this day, I harbor guilt for leaving you guys at the hotel, because guilt. We continued on with the power tour, and you guys were going to leave later, and so we got up early and left. And then we got back and you were like, hey, funny story, and you showed me a picture of an S-shaped connecting rod, and I was like, oh man, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I feel like he purposely kept that from you so it wouldn't ruin your guys' trip. So don't feel you should just let all of that guilt go away.
I feel even worse.
No. There was nothing to do about it other than go home and get a trailer. Like that was just how that was going to roll. So
I think a lot of people have stories like that.
Yeah, it was kind of a bummer. We did the same thing. We drove it to the ham drags and lost the transmission right when we got there, and so we had the trailer home from the ham drags. That was kind of a bummer too, but we were trying. We were trying to do the thing, and that's just hot rods, man. It's just heartbreak sometimes. Hot rods are, but then you have more time to work on it and make things better. And then eventually I put a crate, because the engine that was in there it's now in actually George's 31 Coupe, but it was a engine that came out of a push truck for Bonneville, and so it always had kind of wonky compression. It wasn't quite there, but it was free and it was available. So
right.
It's been in a lot of hot rods over the course of our MacKichan hot rod building days. So in 2009, when the market kind of crashed a little bit, I saved up some money and went and bought a crate engine. Then I had good horsepower, and I had, just part of the progress of the coupe.
To see photos of Jess, John, and a few of their projects, check out the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com by clicking the toolbox link on the front page. Also check out Jess's Instagram account, Photos from My Dad, to see a slice of hot rod life in the 1960s through the lens of John MacKichan. New episodes of What Moves You come out every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you like what you hear, tell a friend to listen to What Moves You on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You mentioned Speedway Motors. Obviously, we work together. You mentioned working with your dad. You started working at Speedway Motors long before a lot of the rest of us. When was that?
Today is actually my 23rd anniversary of working for Speedway, but that starts when I was 16. We actually worked for Joyce when we were like 11, 12. Again, I'll say we because I had a twin and we were always connected. But
right.
Back when the museum was at its old location, they needed help cleaning the pedal cars and cleaning the engines and doing stuff. And so my sister and I would just go, and whatever Joyce needed, we would do, like cleaning the lunch boxes or the cookie jar collection, or
right.
cleaning pedal cars or washing out trash cans, whatever she needed done, and then as we they decided that we were okay help, and we were good workers, they would bring us back and we would work in receiving, bagging bolts, or putting product into boxes or barcoding things. They only had 2 people in receiving back then, and so they would get backlogged, and so on a school vacation we would go and work 10 hours and get them caught up, and then they started to like look forward to our help, so we knew that we were being helpful, so we just kind of worked wherever they needed us to work. And there'd be great big tours of what was then the new museum, and we would shadow tours around through the warehouse and through the museum, and so we just sort of kind of fit ourselves into a spot where we were helpful. And then I worked there through middle school, high school, college, and then when I graduated college, Carson made a spot for me. And I guess you would consider it a technology team now, but back then there wasn't like a team. They taught me, they're like, you're young, you could work on the website. And I was like, yeah, I could learn the website. And so I put product on the website whenever a new catalog came out. And then when I wasn't like busy, they were like, do you want to work in the warehouse today? I was like, okay. So I would go wherever they needed me to go. And then when the museum was getting ready to open for its grand opening in like 2002, I think it was 2002, we worked crazy hours, and I would work there basically full time to help them get second floor set up and get everything clean. And so I just kind of went where I was needed. I worked in the machine shop for a couple days helping drill things, and I just kind of went wherever I was needed, and eventually landed in the advertising department. And by that time I was getting ready to graduate, and Carson, gosh, I forget how it worked out, but I think I was maybe thinking about maybe I should move on, and maybe I need to be a grown up. You know how when you're young, you like,
right.
I'm going to go do things and have a career and all that. And I think Carson kind of pulled me aside and said, you belong here, and made a spot for me, and made it really clear that I was necessary and needed. And so that was really cool to have somebody on my team to say, you know, you're needed here.
Right.
And I started to, I did a lot of, you know, we had, you know, 18 hats, and you do everything that you need to do, everything you're asked to do. And I had a marketing director come in 2007 and say, you're underutilized. And so he grabbed me out of, I think it was in the call center at that point, working on the website. And he taught me marketing, and took me under his wing and taught me all the things I didn't, because I went to school for fine arts. I didn't go to school for marketing.
Right.
And then Carson taught me how to pull lists for catalogs. And then I became kind of the person who decided who got mailed for catalogs, like these great big jobs. And I was like a year out of school and learning hard. Like it was that year I worked my tail off. I worked a lot of hours that year just to figure things out. And gosh, it just moves on forward. But currently, you can skip all this stuff. But currently, I'm the production manager, and I'm part of the creative team, and we work within marketing. And then my customers are the marketing team and the rest of the Speedway coworkers.
And you have, in those years, I mean, you've like won awards. Like people, you're not just quietly working away in the back room at Speedway Motors. I mean,
yeah. In 2014, Rod Authority wrote an article about me, and it was Lindsay Fisher wrote the article, and it was called Leading Ladies, and it kind of pushed me up to the world as a upcoming person in the automotive industry, and that was really, really cool. And in 2016, I was part of the Speedway Motors Bucket Beauties build. A group of us, 5 of us girls, built a T-Bucket together. And so we learned a lot, and that was really, really cool. And then we got to go to NSRA in Louisville to show the car, and that was kind of priceless when it comes to relearning how cars get built and all of that. And how important Speedway's fast shipping is. You need parts every day. So it was really cool to have the larger marketing group learn how important our fast shipping is. And in same year, 2016, I was one of the 35 under 35 for SEMA. So it was 35 young people to watch. And it touted me as an industry leader. So that was really, really cool and important. And I went to SEMA that year and got to see what that was all about, and really feel like I was making a difference, not just at Speedway, but like in the automotive world. This is how I fit into this bigger world. That was really cool.
And you mentioned also for a time you were working with your dad, not directly, but you and your dad were working at Speedway Motors at the same time. How did that affect your relationship?
I think it was really important to see him in a professional light, because I'd always just seen him as dad or in the shop. And when he retired from Squirty in 2004, he came to work for Bill. He started as just to be the curator of the museum, but that quickly turned into a project manager, and he helped start the safety committee, and he helped start the quality control area, and he became essential to like business planning and acquisitions and expansions. And so I saw him in this professional setting that I hadn't seen before. And he's really good at filling the needs around him as well, just like I have learned to do. Just watching him, he taught me how to lead a team and how to work really, really hard. He's a list maker, and he's good at making priorities, and that he's passed that down to all of the rest of us kids. He's good at taking responsibility when something goes wrong, and he taught me how to gracefully do that. And he's good at speaking to power too. He's good at making a case and selling a point of like, this is what we need to do. And he's one of those guys that will just always do what's right. He'll do what's right for the company. He'll do what's right for the customer. He'll do what's right for his people. And he's really built trust with people and with the Smiths with that kind of way of doing things. So he built a lot of loyalty too. People trust him to do the right thing. And that's what he does with the collection or with other people's legacy that are donating items to the museum. That's really important to him. And so I got to see this this adult, and I got to see him in a different setting than I normally did, and it made me appreciate how hard he works and what he made it himself to be.
All of this brings us pretty much up to date, at least within the last several years. And I want to talk about the Photos from My Dad project. Let's first describe what it is, and then how did that get started?
Oh, sure. So the Photos from My Dad is an Instagram project. There's little underscores between each of the words. It's just an Instagram account that I started to load images that I had found of that he had taken in the 60s. And it was a way to share them with the world. And I didn't understand how people would respond to it and how important it was going to be. But in 2016, maybe, he had had an accident at work, and he tangled with a 32 Ford Roadster, and he broke his ankle, and he needed like screws and surgeries. And he was sent home from the hospital, and they were like, take it easy. And that's not part of my dad's, operating system, taking it easy. And so my mom did everything but tie him down to keep him from going to the shop and not taking it easy. And I think part of that was just setting him in a chair and surrounding him with magazines and boxes of photos and books and saying, here, go through this, see what's junk, what's important, and all that. And so he started to sort through all of these things that he hadn't looked at since he was young. And as you move, and things became unorganized. And so he started sorting through all these photos, and eventually he cleaned out his whole office. And now you can go down there, and there's a shoebox that says 1989 Bonneville and 1999 Bonneville. And so they're all labeled now, and all the events he was involved in with the Streamliner. But there was this box left over, and he was like, you come get this box. I'm not sure what to do with it. And if you don't want it, we can throw it away. And so I went out there and I grabbed this box, and I sort of pawed through it, and I didn't at that point, I'm sure I was busy with work, but I didn't have a ton of time to devote to it. So I kind of looked through it and saw these little 3.5 by 3.5 square, like Kodak type pictures. And I was like, oh, those are neat. I need to do something with those. And so kind of in the back of my brain was trying to figure out what to do with them. And I was sorting through them and trying to decide what year they were. Kodak was pretty good about putting print the years on the back of those. And then also he was really organized, and like even as an 18-year-old he was hyper vigilant, and so he wrote on the back of them where he was, or if it was a black and white photo, he wrote the color of the car, and there would be a picture of a pile of parts next to the fence of like, this is the supercharger that he was working on, or whatever he was working on.
Right.
So I started to ask him questions about them, and then he disappeared and came back from the basement with these scrapbooks that he had saved from this, purge. And all of these loose photos had come from those scrapbooks. And so they were extra organized, of like, this is Ubley Airfield in Michigan, and they were by event, and they were like the little square format on pages. Then they were tacked down with those little black corners that you lick, and then they were very and he drew the name Ubley Airfield really big, and it's just like this piece of his adolescence that I didn't understand, I didn't know about. And actually thinking back to when we went to the ham drags, he was so jazzed to be at the ham drags for that like hot rod drag event, and I putting it together now, I was like, of course that was what he did when he was 17, 18, 19, up into the 70s, or up into the late 60s. And so that was just part of him, and I got to see this little snapshot of him. And so then so he gave me all his scrapbooks, and so this project became bigger, like, okay, scan these images, organize them, try to put them in some sort of system that they're archived. So I went online and found these archival books to hold them and get them flat again. A lot of them had curled up the way old photos do. And then I was describing one of the photos to Jeff Carls here at Speedway one day, and I took a picture of it with my cell phone. And when I was messing around later on, I was like, well, that's like Instagram format, the square format. I was like, well, that's duh. So I figured out a way to share them through Instagram, and I figured out a name for it called Photos with My Dad. And the photos range from 1962 to 1967, and there's a lot of them are black and white, but some are in color. And we've since now found 2 reels of 8mm film that we've had digitized. He had borrowed somebody's little like video camera back then, right. And it's just like a snapshot of the culture in the late 60s, and it's just so cool to have been able to. It was saved because it was kind of lost in the basement for a long time, but when I started to share them on Instagram, people like raved about them and would comment like, I can't wait to see more. And a few weeks later, Nick Hazing from Omaha got a hold of me, and he's like, is this your Instagram account? I was like, oh yeah. He put the pieces together, and also the picture is of my dad from the 70s, and he doesn't look much different now than he did in the 70s. So Nick put the pictures together, or the pieces together of who had belonged to this Instagram account, and he shared it with Joe Ukrop from Rogers Journal, and Joey had been working on an article about this Austin that just kind of magically showed up in California in 2018. It was a 2-tone lace type of car, and they were looking for history, and that picture of that Austin was in his photo collection. And so I scanned it really big, like a nice big scan, and sent it to Joey, and then he connected with my dad at I think it was the Roadster Nationals in California that year to talk about it. And so then his picture was featured in the Rogers Journal.
Cool.
This really crazy, like, small world type thing that happened, and also like how important those old photos are. And then so he has pictures from the IRHA Winter Nationals in Spruce Creek drag strip in Daytona. He's got lots of pictures from the Omaha Cornhusker Raceway and Flightland in Omaha in the 60s. The Bristol, Tennessee, Capitol Raceway in Odenton, Maryland, and Ubley Drag Strip in Ubley, Michigan. My grandparents are from Michigan, and so he would travel from Florida to Michigan once or twice a year to go see them. And so wherever he went, he took his camera and he found a drag strip and took pictures. And then there's pictures of a random hot rod at a gas station that they stopped at, just because he found them. Wherever he was, he found a hot rod to ooh over and take a picture of. And
to see these photos, I mean, what they are now that you've organized them into this album, you have this visual diary of this car crazy kid going to the drag strip and taking a bunch of pictures, and a lot of them are no name unknown cars that never to be heard from again. But some of them are, there's obviously in Florida, there's pictures of Garlets and, these famous cars that just sort of pop up at these early drag races. And there are also these pictures of him just sort of being a hot rod kid, and pictures of their backyard garage with 32 Fords with Olds engines. And it's so cool. What are your plans for the future? What are you going to do with that now?
Oh, sure. Just quick before I move on to that, it shows what he was interested in back then too. So he had built an Anglia and drove it to Nebraska when he moved from Florida to Nebraska. And so a lot of his pictures are Anglias, Austins, 33, 34s. You could tell what he was interested in by the pictures he took. And you could tell from, Max was into Corvettes. He had a 65 Corvette. So my dad took pictures of the Corvettes he saw. And my dad had a 32 Coupe in high school for a short time before he wrecked it. And so you could tell what he was interested in by the pictures he took. And so it was like a little freeze frame of what John MacKichan as an 18-year-old was really into. So that was super rad. And then as we shared the history, especially the Omaha pictures, the Nick Smithberg, he's from Fort Calhoun. He said, we have that Anglia now. There was a blue Anglia in the pictures, but it's red now, and they have that as their family car. And then he also has an engine out of one of the rail drag cars. So that there's weird history of this. There's this connection with the history, and the dots are being connected in this strange way that this box of photos started for us. But so on to the future, I really want to create a art book of these images, kind of a square format hardcover book with embossed cover with nice high-end paper, as a way to showcase them. So I think I'll need to invest in a nice scanner and maybe do some research about the drag strips that were around back then that some don't exist anymore. So I just kind of want to make them into a book of some sort, and it probably won't be very many made, but I think there's a future in that for it, just as a project to keep it going. I think I'll start working towards this book idea. And also he's got all these. Did you ever go into his office in the museum? It was lined with all these hot rods he had built over his life.
Yeah.
So all those pictures, there's got to be 20, line his office at home, and every one of those hot rods has a story. And there's a lot that I don't know about. And whenever he starts talking about his 63 Chevy or his 52 Anglia, I take my phone out and I write the notes down of what he's talking about, like how it came to be and where he got it from and what he did to it, and the stories, the adventures of like when the engine blew on the way out to Scottsbluff, like those little things. I want to capture more of those. And there's some road trips in our future, maybe going to Hershey swap meet together, and I'll sit in the truck with the notebook and jot down whatever he tells me and capture those stories, because those stories are important to us. I think as we think about what the future holds for us, I think I want to capture as much of that as I can in his words and save them somehow.
Why is it so important to you to sort of capture all of this and to sort of honor your dad's legacy?
I think it all comes back to making him a priority, the way he made me a priority for so long. Last year when Ed Iskandarian was here for his 100th birthday, he was in Lincoln, and I got to go out to dinner with him and like 14 other people, and we were sitting around the table, and I was kind of able to tune in and out of different conversations depending on who was around me talking. And these two men at the end of the table, I tuned in at just the right time, and one was saying one had been going through radiation and another had gone through chemo, and I heard one say to the other, how often did John call you when you were sick? And the other man said, he called me every week while I was going through my radiation. And the first man said, yeah, he called me every week when I was going through my chemo. And so it kind of reminded me how important he is to everybody around him. And I think that's part of his legacy. That's the quiet part. Like you could look at the hot rods and you can look at the Streamliner and at the museum and how far it's come and say that's John MacKichan. But there's this quiet part of his legacy of how good of a human being he is and how much he has helped the people around him and how important it is to him that we succeed. And that's part of his legacy too. And he's been like important and influential, and he really cares about everybody around him. And the last 2 years have been challenging for our family. We've had some health issues with my mom is immunosuppressed with a blood disorder, and so COVID was really dangerous for her. And so we sort of had to stop going out to the farm and stop seeing them for a good year because we didn't want to sacrifice her just so that we could go out and say hi. But it sort of stole time from us, and you can't get that time back. And so it's just I think it just reprioritized again how important they are to us. And I've talked this whole time about my dad, but like it's my mom too. She has always been so supportive of all of us, and especially to my dad. She enabled him to see his full potential, and she pushed him to be more and to do more. And she removed like roadblocks from him and taught us to stand up for ourselves. And so right now, in honoring him, it also honors her in a certain way, and I hope that comes across.
Thanks to Jess Gasper for being our guest today, and thanks to all of you for listening to What Moves You, a Speedway Motors podcast. To see photos and watch video we referenced in today's episode, visit the toolbox at speedwaymotors.com. Email the podcast at podcast@speedwaymotors.com, and if you like what you heard, tell a friend where to find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.